Hello there, my name is John Shackleton. I work for the British Council. I'm based in the UK. I look after our work in support of teacher educators around the world. It's very nice to be with you today. I'm going to be talking about learning pathways for teacher educators. Yeah. There I am. So that's a little bit about me. What would be good is if you could put your name and where you're based in the chat or the comments box, so we can know a little bit about who you are while we're all together. So if you could do that now, your name and where you're based. While you're doing that, I'm going to say a little bit about what focus of today's session is going to be on. We're going to begin, as you might imagine, with a few starting points to set the scene. We're going to talk a little bit about teacher educators do, kind of settings they work in. Then we're going to have a look at 4 examples from some very experienced teacher educators who are talking about their learning and career pathways. And from that, we're going to look at some, I would say, common considerations and common characteristics of learning pathways for teacher educators, essentially around skills, knowledge and understanding. What kinds of skills and knowledge and understanding would you have as a teacher educator in your learning pathway? Talk about the slightly controversial topic of personality types as well. And linked to personality types, some non-transactional skills as well that are, I would argue, worth considering when you're putting together a learning pathway for yourself as a teacher educator. And then we're going to finish with 2 very practical things. We're going to have a look at some available learning resources that you can put into your career pathway, into your learning pathway as you develop it. And then we're going to have a look at, finally, something that we've developed called the Pathway Builder, which is a structured way of imagining and building a learning pathway if you're a teacher educator. So those are the things that we're going to be looking at today. I hope that's going to be okay. It should be very interesting. I'm going to try and make it as interactive as possible, so we will be pausing at various moments throughout the session. Going to be asking you to think about a few things, do a few things, write some answers and some comments and some questions in the chat or the comments box. So if you're all sitting comfortably and you've said who you are and where you're from, then I think we can make a start. So starting points then, I can't think of anything which is more fundamental to a session on learning and learning for teacher educators in particular. An education system is only as good as its teachers, and how true that is. So if that's the case, then one of the determinants of the quality of classroom teaching, the goodness, if you like, of the teachers within that education systems, depends on the competence of those who teach teachers, teacher educators. Okay, so that's our first starting point. And the second starting point I'd like to spend a little time on is this. Just have a look at that for a second. Okay, so what this means is that we need to think really carefully about the professional development needs for teacher educators, those who teach teachers, because they are a distinct group of professionals and they have a distinct set of professional development needs. Okay, so as we go through today's session, if you could be having a think about those 2 things. The first one is that because teachers in education systems, their quality is desperately important. That means that the individuals, the teacher educators who support teachers, is also desperately important. And then secondly, that for teacher educators, we have a particular set of professional development needs that we need to pay attention to. Okay, so as I said in the outline, we're going to have a look at teacher educator roles. And this is really just to have some kind of shared understanding about what it is that teacher educators do, where they work, what kind of settings they're in, so that when we talk about learning pathways, we know that we're talking about learning pathways for a particular group of people. So just have a look at those 5 bullet points, could you? So, as you can see then, and I think this is my first point, that the role of a teacher educator can be very different compared to other roles performed by teacher educators. Example, an experienced teacher who's providing informal advice in a school to a new teacher. We would say that that was a teacher educator. You can imagine the situation currently in the staff room, for example, in their first week of teaching. There's a more experienced teacher who's saying, yeah, well, if you want to teach the present perfect, this is a good way to start. Another role which is more formal within a Ministry of Education teacher development program, for example, so a clearly defined formal role as a teacher educator, somebody who on a regular basis, as part of their job or indeed their whole job, runs training sessions for primary school teachers, facilitates community practice for primary school teachers, for example. So a formal paid role, particular data attached to it. Third example there, then, so a little bit more specialized in a sense, teacher following a MOOC, getting support from an e-moderator. Well, that e-moderator has a particular job to do, making posts, making forum posts, making an end video, bringing together all the posts, providing some general guidance to the group as a whole. So a bit of a specialist role within the online learning environment for teachers. The teacher educator could also be an academic researcher working in a university setting, doing research into, for example, professional inquiry, artificial intelligence, huge range of research themes within teacher education, of course. A teacher educator could be a lecturer at a teacher training institute who's supervising future teachers in training, goes along to a class that the soon-to-be teacher is delivering to provide guidance and constructive feedback, etc. So they're just 5 examples of many. Okay, and we have a list, a more comprehensive list of teacher educator roles on the teacher educator landing page of the Teaching English website. So what I would like you to do now, we're going to have a slight pause. I'm going to stop talking. And what I'd like you to do is to go to the Teaching English website. That's easy to find. You just need to put in Teaching English into the Google search. And when the website appears, you'll have a couple of choices. Either go to the pages for teachers or the pages for teacher educators. So if you go into the page for teacher educators, then we've got a long list of roles there. So if you could have a look through those roles, and then if you could put in the chat or comment box which of those roles do you think best describes what you do? Okay, so if you could do that now, I'm going to pause for a couple of minutes, go to the Teacher Educator Landing web page, have a look at the list of roles for teacher educators and decide which one best describes what you do, and put that in the chat or the comment box. Okay, I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Okay, I hope you were able to find the Teaching English website and land on our landing page successfully. And I hope also you're able to find the role that best describes you. So that's my main point as regards this section of the session today, that the roles of teacher educators are many and varied, and therefore the kind of professional needs are many and varied, and learning pathways consequently are many and varied. Okay, let's move on. So, as I said in the outline, we've got 4 examples in front of us of experienced teacher educators who have produced a video. It's a webinar that they did in August, looking at their learning and career pathways. For examples, educators experienced performing the kinds of roles, different roles that were described on the landing page that you just had a look at. Before we listen to them, I'd like you to do a little exercise before we look at in detail what they say. And it's this. Just have a look at that for a second. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes then to think about that. Then, would you say that your career to date as a teacher educator is planned, in the sense that you've got particular goals that you've thought about and you'd like to achieve, and you've lined up some professional development opportunities for yourself that will help you to achieve those career goals? If that's the case, if you could write planned in the comments or chat. If that's not the case, you could write something more like accidental or ad hoc or unplanned. Yeah, okay, so just have a think about that for a minute or so. Put your answers in the chat. Okay. I'll be back in a second. Okay, did you manage to do that then? Manage to decide whether you're the kind of person that plans, you've got a career path that's all laid out, you're more freewheeling. Okay. So these 4 case studies then, 4 experienced teacher educators, then the webinar that we organized on the 8th of August, so just a few weeks ago, we asked them to lay out kind of learning they'd done, what kind of pathway they'd followed, what sort of career goals they had, and in particular what they were doing now and the kinds of skills and understanding that they'd developed to become an experienced teacher educator. And the title of that webinar is Developing Skills to Enhance Your Career as a Teacher Educator. And after we've had a little bit of a discussion, I'm going to ask you to go and locate that webinar, which is on the Teaching English website, of course. First of all, though, I'd like to pick out what I think are some common characteristics, common themes that they touch on and that I think are quite indicative of learning pathways for teacher educators in general. And we hear from 4 people, Shirin, Radhika and Doina. And I'll be asking you a few questions about them once you've had a chance to visit our website. So these are the kind of things that they talk about, and I think these are key things, key ingredients, characteristics of learning pathways for teacher educators. First point then, overall, those pathways tend not to be linear. Okay? They tend to be continuous, cyclical, change over time, change in relation to experience, but are not linear. And I think that's a very important point to hang on to. And one thing that all 4 of those teacher educators talk about is to do with something which is foundational. You know that one of the, I suppose, criticisms that teachers often make of teacher educators is that teacher educators are in some way out of touch with classroom reality. So all 4 of our teacher educators that we listen to talk about the need to build on their skills as a teacher, those practical classroom skills, practical classroom experience. And that's a starting point, kind of informs how they learn, what they do, their approach to teacher education as their career has developed over time. So that's a really important starting point they all mention. Okay. And they talk also a little bit about approaches to learning. So not just what was in their learning pathway, but how they approached their learning. And as well as programs of study, all 4 of them went on to do some postgraduate qualifications in an area related to teacher educator learning. But what they stress is that their skills, their knowledge, their understanding is experiential, and that they've spent a lot of time learning by doing, or learning on the job, as one of them describes. So I think those 3 things particularly important when it comes to thinking about developing your own learning pathway, that we've got an idea that they're not necessarily linear, got an idea that they're built on practical teaching skills earned as a classroom teacher, and that a lot of the learning, in addition to postgraduate study, for example, is through experience, through doing. The 4 teacher educators, as you will see, talk a lot about knowledge and understanding. So one of the things that they mention in terms of that knowledge base is that teacher educators need to understand different models of teacher learning. Okay? So different models, it could be training delivery, it could be facilitating collaborative learning, it could be mentoring a teacher so that they can undertake practitioner-led learning. It might be supporting self-directed learning. There are any number of ways that teachers learn, and teacher educators, as part of their knowledge bank, that area of knowledge that they need to have is around different models of teacher learning. Okay, they all mention their need to understand theory, and that, as well as we talked about this, as well as building on practical skills, practical experience, learning by doing, they also need to have a thorough grounding, especially in theories of adult learning. Whereas teachers might need theoretical knowledge of language acquisition, for example, or how children learn. Well, for teacher educators, the equivalent of that is theories of adult learning. And they all mention, and this is particularly important, that, and I think it probably applies to any kind of professional development support, that they need to have a very good sense of the audience in front of them. They have to have a very good sense and understanding of the teachers that they work with. So what kind of understanding? Well, the culture and the context in which teachers work, what teachers believe in, what their core values are, what they need, what their attitudes are. So a thorough, really thorough understanding of their audience, the audience of teachers. Okay, so, and as well as knowledge and understanding, they talk about a range of specific skills and abilities that they believe that teacher educators need to have, and therefore need to be included in any learning and career pathway for a teacher educator. About management skills, you know, so not about educational skills as such, but management skills, planning, coordination, evaluation, etc. All 4 of them talk about the importance of being able to harness the power of technology, and that increasingly, as a teacher educator, they really need advanced digital literacy, advanced pedagogical techniques within the online environment, so that they can really build on some of the great benefits that online learning can provide. And they all mention another fundamental skill, which is to do with creating a positive, non-judgmental and safe learning environment. So how do you do that? What kind of skills do you need? What kind of learning could take place in an environment which was judgmental, which was unsafe, which was essentially demotivating? That seems to me to be a very difficult undertaking. So the opposite, the skills to develop really productive and successful learning environment, desperately important for a teacher educator, and therefore very much part of the kinds of skills that should be included in any learning pathway for a teacher educator. They talk about developing the skills to reflect, and not just to reflect themselves, but how to promote reflection amongst the teachers that they're working with. They talk especially about feedback, and again, not just how to provide constructive feedback, but how they themselves as educators, need to have that ability to accept feedback as well as dish it out, as it were. Okay. And they also all mention the ability to be able to deploy skills that are appropriate to a selected learning approach. For example, if you're a teacher educator and you're facilitating a community of practice, for example, you need a set of different skills compared to those that you would need if you were delivering a training session. So learning how to choose the right skill for the right kind of learning mode or learning approach, very important for these four, and I would say in general as well. Okay. So that's a summary, if you like, of what it is that Shirin and Radhika and Anne Doyner, as experienced teacher educators, say in relation to their professional development pathway. So we're going to pause for a second, well, for a bit longer than a second. And so I'm going to ask you to do something again. I'm going to give you 5 or 6 minutes to do this, if we can. So what I'd like you to do is to go again to the Teaching English website. I'd like you to find the pages which are webinars for teacher educators. Okay. And on that page, I'd like you to find this particular webinar, the webinar that we're talking about. That's the recording of it. It's called Developing Skills to Enhance Your Career as a Teacher Educator. You just to have a little look at that, just to acquaint yourself with it, just to understand a little bit of the context in which I've been talking. Okay, and I'd like you, if you have time, and it'd be really good that after this session, if you can take a longer look at that. It's really very important stuff for helping you to choose your learning pathway and to reflect on the kinds of skills, knowledge and understanding you might need. So take a little bit of time, a quick look at that video now. And I've got a couple of questions that I'd like you to answer and put in the chat, comments box. There are 4 speakers, if you remember: Shirin, Radhika, Anne and Doyner. I'd like you to find out where they come from. And then secondly, in the chat, I'd like you to answer this very simple question. Do you prefer to attend live sessions or watch recordings in your own time? Okay, so we're going to come back in 5 minutes or so. If you could have a look at that very quickly, have a look at that video, and then put your answers in the chat. Great, see you in a second. Okay, I hope you had a chance to look at that recording. It's a very good one. I hope you're able to give yourself a little bit of time to look at that in more detail after the session is over. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is to talk about something which I said at the beginning was a little bit controversial. Okay? It's about personality. So when we've been talking about skills, knowledge, and understanding. We've been talking about an overall view of the learning pathways. How does personality fit into that? Other things that we ought to be thinking about in relation to our personality that will help us to be better teacher educators, things that we can work on over time as part of our learning and career development. Controversial, perhaps, but there's probably the case that there's a consensus within psychology that there are, well, a consensus around the big five categorization of personality types. Okay? And these are them. So just have a look at that for a minute or so. And a very handy kind of way, those big five, if you put them in that order, the initial letter of each of the categories together spells ocean. So O is for openness, C is for conscientiousness, E is for extroversion, A is for agreeableness, and N, I don't really like this too much, but there you go, is for neuroticism. Okay, but what do all of these words mean? So openness to experience then. So to what extent more sort of curious, inventive, take risks, that kind of thing, compared to being more regular, more consistent, more disciplined, more structured, more cautious. Okay, so start thinking about that in relation to yourself. So conscientiousness then, so and to what extent on one end of that spectrum, that line, hyper efficient, ruthlessly organized, or a little bit less organized, a little bit more carefree, let's say, in terms of your approach in general in life. Extroversion, tremendously controversial theme, of course, but people understand it in different ways. But again, general consensus that on the extrovert end of that client tend to be outgoing, energetic, things you tend to externalize things, that the thinking, if you like, that reflection takes place in public, let's say. And then on the more introvert end of that spectrum, a bit more reserved, things are happening inside your head in private, as it were. And that's often how I think about extroversion. Agreeableness. So on the one hand, friendly, compassionate, very empathetic, looking for social harmony. The other end of the scale, more rational, more driven by ideas, more critical, if you like, a more a cooler, if you like, approach to how you relate to other people, as determined by your personality. And then finally, which is really to do with the extent to which you are, on the one hand, one end of the extreme, very sensitive, very easily troubled and disturbed, and the other end of the spectrum where you are more resilient, more confident, and in a sense, more grounded in your personality. So that's a very quick run through that very controversial topic of personality, but I think it's important to talk about it, and I think it's important to have a position on it. And what I'd like you to do now is to think about those 5: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. To kind of think about where you fit on that spectrum. All right, I've given you an example there. You don't know me very well, don't know me at all, but it's probably true to say that I'm fairly cautious. I'm consistently cautious, that the core of my personality is one of caution. So if 1 is very, very inventive, open, experimental, etc., and 10 is the opposite of that, then I would put myself somewhere at 7. Okay, so can you take a few minutes to think about yourself in relation to these personality types, these personality categories? And in the chat, the comment box, if you just put O7 if that's you, or O2 if that's you, and then C4 if that's you. Okay. All right, if you could do that now, we'll be back in a couple of minutes to have a look at what you've put. Okay, see you in a second. Okay, I hope you had a chance to think about what kind of a person you are there, and you were brave enough, I suppose, which has something to do with E, N, and O, that you're brave enough to share your answers in the chat with everybody else in the session today. And finally then, before we have a practical look at some of the resources that you can include in your learning pathway, I'd just like to mention just a couple of other things. Non-transactional skills, by which I mean things that are around looking after yourself. We talk a lot, don't we, about motivation for teachers, resilience and well-being for teachers, teachers having a sense of professional identity and belonging. Well, what about teacher educators? So as part of your learning pathway, as part of your career development, how can you maintain motivation? There are some things that you can do to stay motivated. How can you develop stronger resilience and more consistent well-being? How does professional identity and belonging fit into the kind of learning that you would like to do in the future? And as my wife often says, you can't look after other people if you can't look after yourself. So somewhere in the mix then, alongside thinking about some transactional skills, like how to facilitate groups, how to train people, how to help people reflect, how to give constructive feedback, those hard skills that teacher educators need, alongside the kind of knowledge and understanding, like adult learning theory, for example, that all teacher educators need to know, alongside thinking about your personality and other aspects of your personality that you can perhaps foreground because you think that they're helpful for promoting good learning amongst teachers, those aspects of your personality that you might want to, in a sense, mitigate because you think they hinder the creation of that positive learning environment. Alongside all of those things, then another set of, if you like, considerations and characteristics of learning pathways for teacher educators around these non-transactional skills, around questions of motivation. How do you keep motivated? Questions of resilience and well-being, and questions around professional identity and belonging. Okay, so in a sense, that was the background a little bit, I think, to what you need to be thinking about in terms of developing a learning pathway. If you're a teacher educator, I would say. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at what's out there in terms of learning resources that you can make use of to develop professionally as a teacher educator. Okay, so one really important resource, and I'm always talking about this, is the CPD framework for teacher educators. It's an excellent starting point for anybody that's interested in getting on in their career and developing the kinds of skills they need as a teacher educator. It describes competence against 11 professional practices, and it's got 4 developmental stages. So you're able to think, okay, well, I'm good at this, I'm not so good at that, I need to learn more about this, I don't need to worry about that, I'm already an expert in it. And the kind of professional practices that are in there, we'll look at those. As a teacher educator, for example, if you look at the skills section, bullet 3, evaluating teacher competence. Well, many supervisors, and that's a very common role for teacher educators, they need to do is they need to evaluate teacher competence and teacher performance. They need to provide constructive feedback. They need to help teachers get better at what they're doing based on what they see in the classroom, for example. So as an example of a skill, that's the way that the framework works. And in terms of levels, then, foundation, engagement, integration, and specialization. A little activity for you to do here. So if you think about your current, if you like, level as a teacher educator, and just think about, are you already a teacher educator? Are you thinking about becoming a teacher educator? Are you like Anne and Sharon, Doyle and Radica? Are you very experienced teacher educators? Where are you exactly? Any learning pathway for any individual has got to start with an analysis of where it is you are exactly in that journey. So if you are an experienced teacher, but you've never done any teacher educator work, if you've never trained any teachers, if you've never delivered any workshops, if you've never supported other teachers, then you're pretty much at the foundation level at the beginning of that journey. If you've done some practical work in supporting teachers, if you've delivered a workshop, for example, then a little bit further on in your journey, then probably at the engagement level. If, on the other hand, you're experienced in the sense that that experience has led to a high level of competence, you know, you feel like you got some of those skills, that knowledge, that understanding, thought about your personality, thought about those non-transactional things, very competent as a teacher educator, then you're pretty much at the integration level. And then if you're at the point in your career where you're a point of reference, that you're a specialist in an area of teacher education, then you would be the specialization level. So have a think about those. And I'll give you a minute. If you put in the chat, then have a think about yourself. What current level are you at? So if you are foundation, put F, engagement E, integration I, and specialization S. So if you could have a go at that now, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, well, I hope you managed to do that. What I'd like to do now, then, I'm going to come back to this. I went through that fairly quickly, but that's the CPD framework for teacher educators, the professional practices, these development stages, are key to what I'm going to be talking about in a second. Okay. As many of you know, then, we're talking about available resources for teacher educators. As many of you know, as some of you will have done today, you've gone to the Teaching English website. There's a teacher educator landing page, and that gives you all of the available opportunities, events, resources that we've got. We've got a monthly webinar program. The webinar that we looked at today, that's part of that monthly webinar program. We've got a monthly newsletter. We've got an enormous number of resources that include things like training room plans, lesson plans, webinars that we've done, articles. We've got what's called Pathway Builder, and I'm going to talk in detail about that when we come to it at the end. And we've got an enormous amount of research and insight on any number of themes related to teacher education. These are all open access opportunities, and they're all available through the Teaching English website, of course. We've got a MOOC in development at the moment called Helping Teachers to Learn. So if MOOCs are your preferred way of learning, then please, as the advertisers used to like to say, watch this space, because that'll be coming out in the autumn. It's going to be ready very shortly. And that's kind of an introduction to some of the skills and knowledge and understanding that I was talking about earlier. And also in launch at the same time, we're going to have a dedicated social media space for teacher educators, a place for you to connect and collaborate independently. Okay. And in addition to those open access opportunities, we also have closed access opportunities as well, which are available for teacher educators who are part of British Council programs overseas. And one very important closed access opportunities training course called the Assured Certificate in Teacher Education. We have colleagues from Brazil who are currently on that course. and that looks at essentially about developing skills and understanding to deliver a successful training. So it's helps teacher educators really go through what kinds of skills, what kinds of thinking, what kinds of planning, what kinds of evaluation, etc. you need to give really good training, and that's an excellent qualification. We also have the COP, the Community of Practice Leader Support Program. So that's a training course that's looking, perhaps ironically to some extent, but not ironically at all. It is a training course, and it's facilitation skills in relation to setting up and maintaining and evaluating communities of practice for teachers. So the focus there is on the skills you need to promote collaborative learning. And we also have small groups of teacher educators who are part of learning and exchange programs, small groups working together. And these small groups are facilitated by what we call an engagement leader, a facilitator, a very experienced teacher educator who works with groups of teacher educators to help them learn, exchange, and produce. And we, for example, got learning pathways into the assured certificate in teacher education, for example. So that's a small group working together on a program that will help them to prepare for the assured certificate in teacher education. But Pathway Builder, as I say, I'm going to talk about that in a second. We've got other groups who are working on particular, if you like, assets and collaborative outputs and resources that are linked to particular programs. For example, we have a group from Sri Lanka who are working on a guide for novice e-moderators. We also have special interest groups as well in disability, gender, and we're going to start a couple in action research and AI in teacher education. So small groups working together either on a learning program or on a resource production program, or are brought together because they have a shared special interest in a professional theme related to teacher education. And every year in December, bring everybody together for an annual online symposium, and that will be happening this December as well. Okay, so just to be clear then, we've got two types of opportunity then for you. Open access via the Teaching English website, open access opportunities that you can include in your learning pathways. And we have closed access opportunities that are available for teacher educators who are working with the British Council. And those opportunities include training courses, and they include belonging to a community of practice that's looking at training, shared roles and shared interests, with a big symposium in December that brings all of that together. So those are the very quick run through of the kind of resources that are available for teacher educators, and you'll see details of those on our website, of course. So I said that I would like to finish today's session with a look at the Pathway Builder, which is a structured way of organizing your learning. And I would say a really good way into the idea of planning professional development. We've got a very good explanation of what it is, which is available on our teacher educator landing page. So after this session, if you can have a good look at that, that would be great, and I think particularly useful. In summary then, and I'll go through this fairly slowly, although we are running a little bit out of time now. So it's very straightforward. Step number one, the CPD framework for teacher educators, and I provided a brief overview of that earlier in the session. So that's the starting point. Have a look at that framework. That framework describes your competence in relation to professional practices, okay? And it includes a 1 to 4 evaluation scale that helps you to position yourself in terms of the stage of your development against a particular professional practice. That's what's called a framework. Okay. So alongside that framework, we have a self-assessment tool for teacher educators called the TSAT. Okay. And what that is a bank of questions that you answer, and the results of those series of questions you record on your profile chart. And you look at your profile chart after you've finished, and you can see, okay, then, well, so these are my strengths. These are the areas that I'm already pretty good at. I don't need to think too much about those. I've got those. And then other areas where you think, okay, yeah, I'd like to know something more about that. I don't know much about that at all. I need to develop that further. So it gives you an idea of what your strengths and your areas that you need to develop are. Okay. Once you've done that, then we've brought together some curated resources, and they map onto the professional practices for teacher educators. So you can look at those curated resources and you think, okay, then I want to know more about how I can support teachers to develop an inclusive classroom. Okay, one of the things I want to find out more about is how to be more effective in the online environment. So we brought all of those resources together, and you can look and pick and choose. What kind of resources? Well, they're webinar recordings, they're podcasts, they're articles, they're research pieces. So collectively, they will contribute to your professional development, and you get to choose which resources that you'd like to look at in relation to your strengths and weaknesses. Okay, and then we've got a pathway builder template. So all this is, it's really a bit like a portfolio, I suppose you could call it. So you pick out, you say, okay, so week 1, I'm going to have a look at this resource. Week 2, I'm going to have a look at this resource. Week 3, I'm going to have a look at this resource, etc. And there are some prompts in that template. And those prompts are very straightforward. They ask you a question. And so what is this resource about? What did you learn from it? What are the main points in it? Number 1. And then number 2, so how am I going to use what I've learned from this resource in my work as a teacher educator? So how am I going to apply that learning? Okay, so as you go through this 8-week block, and you build up for each resource that you've looked at, you build up, it's a record of what you've learned, what you've thought about, how you are going to apply the skills and understanding that are resident in the resource that you've looked at. Okay, and then at the end of the 8-week period, you'll have 8 resources. You'll have a completed template. You just need to upload that template in a special pathway builder form. If you can do that successfully, then you get your certificate at the end of that 8-week period. Okay, nice and simple? I think so. Okay then, so in the few minutes that are remaining to us, what I'd like to do is just really kind of run over a few points that we've looked at today, just to jog your memories a bit. And then I'm going to close with a summary. So just take, it says 10 minutes, you don't need 10 minutes, just a couple of minutes will be fine, of course. So if you could have a look at those questions there. Okay. There's 6. And if you could put your answers, it's either true or it's false. That's the way the world works, isn't it? It's black and white. If you think that the answer to question 1 is false, put Q1 equals F. Okay, nice and simple. So if you could have a look at that now, and I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm sure you've got to the end there, and I'm just going to quickly run through the answers just in case there are any doubts about it. Yes, question number one, it's true, of course, there are many teacher-educator roles. Does that matter? Yes, of course it does. Of course it does. And it matters because if we're saying that professional development, for it to work, has to match what it is that somebody does, then clearly the fact that teacher educators do many different things means that the range of professional development opportunities has to be large, and it has to be, in essence, needs-based, of course. Question two is false, of course. As we said at the beginning, teacher educators need professional development. Being an effective teacher educator isn't just a case of being an experienced teacher. We said, didn't we, that perhaps a foundational point is having very good teaching skills, but that doesn't make you a teacher educator. Okay, question number three, yeah, that's false, isn't it? As we saw, they tend not to be linear, as you saw with Sharon and Anne, with Radhika and Doina. Their career paths go back to teaching, develop further through following a course, think a lot about what they would like to specialize in. So they see that it was experiential, and that they're continually looking at their learning pathway and updating it based on changing reality, changing need, changing what's the word I'm looking for? Priorities. That's it. 5 personality types. That's correct. Yeah. Can you remember them? Ocean, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Okay. That discussion on personality types, something to think about. Yeah, a lot of controversy. Question number 5, is there a CPD framework for teacher educators? Well, yes, there is. Yeah, and it's a really good starting point for any learning pathway that you're hoping to develop. And question 6 is obviously true, I hope. Okay, so quick recap then before we close. We had a look at starting points, didn't we? If you remember, we said the quality or the strength of an education system is only as good as its teachers. So therefore, the individuals who teach teachers, very important. And they're a distinct group, discrete group. They've got their own professional needs that we need to attend to. Teacher educator roles, many and varied, and that's important in terms of choosing the right kind of professional development opportunity, the right kind of learning pathway that's suitable for what you do for a living. We looked at 4 example learning and career pathways, and do take the time, if you've got time, to have a look at that webinar in full, from which those characteristics, skills, knowledge and understanding, a little bit of a discussion about personality types and non-transactional skills such as resilience, well-being, motivation, etc. They're very much contained in, the skills, knowledge and understanding, very much contained in those 4 case studies that we looked at. We went fairly quickly through the available learning resources, but essentially there's a lot out there. Some are open access, some are closed access. For those closed access opportunities, you need already to be working with the British Council to be able to make use of those. You need to be involved in one of their programs. And then we finished with a very practical look at something which we think is very helpful for developing your learning pathway, and it's called the Pathway Builder. So, thank you very much indeed for attending today's session. It's been a pleasure having this opportunity to talk to you, and I wish you all the very best of luck on your journey as teacher educators. Thank you. All the best.